have always loved the outdoors. Since I was a kid, camping felt like the closest thing to freedom. The smell of pine, the crackling of a campfire, the starry sky, it all made me feel alive. So, when I planned a weekend trip to the woods just outside my town, I was looking forward to nothing but peace and quiet. The forest was about 20 minutes from my apartment by car, just enough distance to feel like I had escaped the city, but close enough that I wasn't completely isolated. I knew the area well. It was a popular spot for hikers and campers, surrounded by tall trees, winding dirt trails, and a small lake perfect for fishing or just sitting by and thinking. That afternoon, I packed my gear carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small first aid kit, and my phone, though I knew reception might be spotty. I wore practical clothes, hiking boots, cargo pants, and a simple long-sleeve shirt. No fancy outfits, just something comfortable for the woods. I had done this trip many times before, and it usually went without any problems. Driving up the narrow road to the campground, I noticed only a few cars parked. The area was quiet. I found a good spot near the edge of the forest, close enough to the trail but tucked away enough to feel private. I set up my tent slowly, making sure the stakes were secure and my sleeping bag was dry. The sun was starting to dip low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the ground. The air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. Birds chirped softly, settling in for the night. Once my camp was ready, I took a short walk down the trail, enjoying the cool breeze. I kept my phone in my pocket, but I didn't really check it much. I wanted to be disconnected. The forest felt alive. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. But even in this peaceful setting, I couldn't shake a feeling I sometimes got alone in the woods. The feeling that I was being watched. That night, after dinner by the campfire, I crawled into my tent early. The forest was dark and quiet, except for the occasional snap of twigs outside. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling and drifted off to sleep. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. There was a sound, soft footsteps on the dirt path leading past my camp. At first, I thought it was another camper or a hiker passing by. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The footsteps slowed as if the person had noticed something. Then, they seemed to come closer, moving in the direction of my tent. My heart began to pound. I wasn't sure if I should confront whoever was out there or stay quiet. I grabbed my flashlight and quietly unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek out. A man was standing just beyond the trees, barely visible in the weak moonlight filtering through the leaves. He was wearing dark clothes, a hoodie pulled over his head, and jeans. He didn't look like a hiker. Something about the way he moved was wrong. Too careful, too deliberate. I tried to make myself small and hoped he wouldn't notice me. I watched as he crouched down, slowly moving closer toward my tent. My mind raced. Was he going to rob me? Hurt me? I didn't know, but I knew I had to act. I reached for my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Of course, I had known that could happen in the woods, but I had hoped it wouldn't be a problem. Now, it was a problem. I tried calling my dad, but the call wouldn't connect. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The man suddenly stopped moving and looked directly at my tent. I held my breath, frozen in place. For a long moment, he stood there silently. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared back into the darkness. I stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching a small pocket knife I kept for emergencies, listening for any sign he might return. The forest, which had seemed peaceful and welcoming hours earlier, now felt menacing and dangerous. At first light, I packed up my things quickly, my nerves on edge. I didn't want to stay another minute in that spot. As I walked back toward the parking area, I kept my eyes peeled for anyone suspicious, but the forest was empty. When I got home, my hands still trembling, I called the police. I told them everything, the footsteps, the man outside my tent, how I couldn't call for help because of no signal. They said they would send a patrol to check the area, though they warned me it might be hard to find someone without more evidence. Over the next few days, I stayed on edge. I changed my route when I went for walks, avoided the woods entirely, and kept my doors locked at home. The police called me once, asking more questions and telling me they hadn't found any trace of the man. They encouraged me to report anything else unusual, but nothing ever came of it. I never did find out who that man was or what he wanted. There was no arrest, no sign of him. The whole experience left a mark on me. It was a reminder that even places that feel safe can hide danger, and that sometimes the scariest part is not knowing what could have happened. In the end, I learned to trust my instincts more and to prepare better. Now, when I go camping, I make sure my phone is fully charged with a backup battery, and I always tell someone where I'll be. I carry pepper spray and keep my knife close. I don't take my safety for granted anymore. Even though the woods still call to me, I am more cautious now. The freedom I once felt there has been shadowed by a real fear, but I won't let that fear stop me from loving the outdoors. Instead, I carry it with me, a warning and a lesson learned the hard way. I don't usually think about how much my outfit can affect my safety until something happens to make me realize it matters more than I thought. That day started like any other, just a normal school day. I had picked out my clothes carefully, something I often did. I liked feeling good about what I wore, even if it was just a regular day. That morning, I chose a skirt with shorts underneath and stockings, a combination that made me feel both comfortable and confident. The skirt was a bit short, but with the shorts, I didn't feel exposed. I threw on a simple shirt, but honestly, it didn't really matter. What mattered most was how I looked and how I felt. I had headphones on, the music turned up high. I wanted to drown out everything. The noise of the day, the stress, the constant buzz of school and people talking around me. My world shrank down to the songs I was listening to, the rhythm of my footsteps on the sidewalk, and the soft rustle of leaves in the spring breeze. As I walked home that afternoon, the path was familiar, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was humming along with the music, barely noticing the world around me. That's when I felt something brush against my back. It was faint, like a soft wind or maybe the touch of a stray leaf falling. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe I was brushing up against a branch or some tall grass beside the trail. I kept walking, lost in my music and my thoughts. But then it happened again, more clearly this time. I could feel it, a brush, almost like someone had come too close behind me. I stopped and turned my head slightly to look behind. My eyes caught a figure, just a shadow at first, but then the shape of a man came into view not far behind me. He was maybe 2 inches away, almost too close. I froze. My heart jumped into my throat. My breath caught in my chest. I yanked off my headphones quickly, the music stopping with a sharp click in my ears. He was standing there, looking a bit flustered, like he had been caught doing something he shouldn't. I screamed without meaning to. It was an automatic reaction to the shock and the sudden closeness of a stranger. Then, almost immediately, I apologized silently to him because he didn't seem aggressive. He looked nervous and quickly stepped in front of me, turning away as if to walk off. He sped up his pace, disappearing down the path ahead of me. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know what to think, but there was a strange feeling of violation, of someone invading my personal space in a way that made my skin crawl. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just a weird accident or a misunderstanding. Maybe he had been too close by mistake. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The strange breeze against my skirt, the way he was so close, the look on his face, it didn't feel right. I decided to slow down, taking a few breaks along the way home. I walked more cautiously, scanning the path behind me every few seconds. The woods were quiet, except for the rustling of the leaves and the occasional chirping of birds settling in for the evening. The sun was starting to dip low, casting long shadows across the trail. It was peaceful, but I felt uneasy in a way I couldn't shake. Finally, after what felt like forever, I reached my apartment complex. I was relieved to be close to home, but I still felt on edge. As I walked up the steps toward my front door, I noticed something unusual, something that made my heart stop again. There was a guy standing right under the staircase that led up to my apartment. The stairway was made of wood with gaps between the steps, so anyone standing underneath was partially visible through the holes. He looked like a kid from my high school, wearing a hoodie and basketball shorts, but I didn't recognize him. His presence there was strange, and the way he was standing under the stairs felt deliberate. He was positioned exactly where someone could try to look up through the spaces between the steps. My stomach twisted in fear and disgust as I realized what he was probably trying to do. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at him through the gaps. My mind raced, and the feeling of violation came back stronger than before. I could see him pull out his phone and angle it upward, obviously trying to take pictures. My hands trembled. I tried to keep calm, to think about what to do next, but my body felt like it was stuck. My front door was locked, and to make matters worse, my electronic key wouldn't work. The lock was connected to my phone, and for some reason, it wasn't connecting properly. I tried again and again, but it just wouldn't open. The panic rose inside me. I was outside, trapped, with this creepy guy right beneath my stairs, taking pictures of me without my permission and worse, exposing himself. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't walk back down the stairs because he was right there, and I couldn't get into my apartment. I felt completely helpless and scared. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I wanted to scream, to call someone, but I was afraid to draw too much attention in case he reacted badly. I pulled out my phone and quickly called my dad, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I told him what was happening, my voice barely steady. He told me to stay calm and that he was calling the police right away. It was the best advice I could get in that moment. I stayed just out of sight, trying to stay hidden behind a corner near the entrance, and I shouted at the man to leave, hoping to scare him off. I didn't know if he would listen or if he was dangerous. I wasn't sure what he was capable of, but I wasn't going to stay there any longer. I made up my mind to run for the community office in the apartment complex. It was only a short distance away, and I knew there would be people there. Someone who could help me, someone I could be safe with. I took a deep breath and sprinted down the stairs, glancing back quickly to see if he was following me. To my relief, he wasn't there anymore. The spot under the stairs was empty. Still shaking and breathing hard, I ran as fast as I could to the office. When I got there, I found a phone to call my dad again and explain everything. Soon after, my dad arrived and managed to unlock the front door for me. I rushed inside and locked the door behind me, finally safe. Later that evening, the police came by to ask questions. They told me they would keep an eye out for the man, though they never found him. I never saw him again, and I hoped with everything I had that he wouldn't come back. That experience changed me. It made me more aware of how vulnerable I could be and how important it was to be cautious. I realized how quickly something that starts as a normal day can turn into a frightening ordeal. Even now, whenever I walk home or pass by places like that staircase, I feel a chill remembering how close I was to danger. I learned to trust my instincts more and to always be aware of my surroundings. I keep my phone close and never hesitate to reach out to someone if I feel unsafe. That day left a mark on me, but it also taught me the importance of being prepared and vigilant. I'm stronger now, but the fear and shock of that afternoon still linger with me. A reminder that sometimes danger hides in the most ordinary places. This is a deeply detailed, realistic recounting of that scary experience, told in first person, focusing on atmosphere, emotions, and clarity. Since you want it extremely long and detailed, if you want me to extend it further with more sensory detail, thoughts, reflections, and description, I can absolutely continue adding depth and length in this style. Would you like me to keep expanding it more into full length? I grew up living deep in the woods, not in some remote cabin miles from civilization, but close enough that the comforts of plumbing and electricity were always within reach, just a short walk or quick drive away. This meant my childhood and adolescence were a strange mix of wilderness adventure and the easy access to modern life. We had all the typical things that made the woods feel like an endless playground. But when night fell, the forest still held a quiet, heavy darkness that swallowed the light whole. Every summer, my friends and I would have these campouts in the clearing near my house. We'd pitch tents, build campfires, and spend entire nights outside under the stars. Even though we weren't roughing it like true survivalists, the woods still felt alive, mysterious, and sometimes a little dangerous. The kind of place where every sound could make your heart jump. from the call of an owl to the rustling of a small animal moving through the undergrowth. One of our favorite games was something we called Manhunt. It was basically hide and seek, but with a twist. Only the hunter was allowed to have a flashlight, which they used to search for the others hiding in the moonlit woods. The rest of us had to stay in the shadows, trying not to be caught. The moonlight was enough to make the trees and the forest floor visible, but it still made hiding tricky. The flickering beam of the flashlight cutting through the dark made everything feel tense and exciting. We played Manhunt almost every campout. It was a way to make the woods feel like a giant playground, full of shadows and suspense. As a kid, it was thrilling, scary, and absolutely unforgettable. One night, during one of these games, I was hiding with a couple of friends deeper in the woods than usual. We had decided to go further than the usual spots, pushing ourselves a little more, making the game tougher. The forest was thick, with tall trees and thick bushes that blocked most of the moonlight. We crouched behind a large fallen log, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The only sounds were the rustle of leaves as a gentle breeze swept through the trees, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot from an animal somewhere unseen, and the distant calls of night birds. The flashlight beam from the hunter was sweeping through the trees in the opposite direction, near the edge of the clearing by the house, so we thought we were safe. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a flashlight appeared behind us, moving slowly through the bushes and branches in the opposite direction of where we expected it. It was completely unexpected because we assumed the hunter would only be near the house side. The flashlight beam was accompanied by the sound of leaves crunching and twigs snapping underfoot. It wasn't a quiet, cautious step. It was the unmistakable noise of someone walking through the forest, very close. My heart jumped. My friends and I exchanged wide-eyed looks, barely daring to breathe. Whoever this was wasn't part of our game. The fear hit all at once. We bolted, running as fast as we could back toward the house, screaming and yelling, the sound echoing through the woods. The adrenaline took over completely, and nothing else mattered but getting to safety. Looking back now, I doubt whoever was out there meant any harm. It was probably a person just out for a walk, or maybe someone else camping nearby. Maybe they got just as startled as we did by a group of kids suddenly jumping up and screaming in the middle of the night. Still, at that moment, the fear was real and overwhelming. What makes the memory stick with me isn't just the scare itself, but how it changed my view of the woods. The forest had always been a place of freedom and fun, but that night, it became something unpredictable. It was a reminder that even in familiar places, you can never be completely sure what or who might be out there. The next morning, the woods looked peaceful again. The sunlight filtered softly through the leaves, birds sang in the trees, and everything felt normal. My friends and I laughed nervously about what had happened, brushing it off as part of the game. We kept playing Manhunt many times after, always a little more cautious, but never fully scared away. Now, years later, that night still stands out in my memory, a perfect example of how the woods can be beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The shadows that once felt like just part of the game now remind me to respect the unknown. The forest is home to many things, and not all of them are friendly. But that's the reality of living near the woods. It's a mix of excitement and risk. You grow up with the sounds of nature in your ears and the knowledge that the dark holds secrets you might never fully understand. I still go camping, still love the outdoors, but I never forget that night. The night when a simple game turned into a real, scary moment. A moment that taught me about fear, respect, and the unpredictable wild just beyond the edge of the house. It was the first weekend of October, and I had taken Friday off work to head out early into the woods. I needed a break from everything. My job, the city noise, and the people. I hadn't camped in almost a year, but I still had all my gear packed and ready. I chose a spot that was about a 4-hour drive north from where I lived. It was deep in the woods, far from cell towers, towns, or anyone else. I found it last year while hiking and marked it on a paper map. No official trail led to it, just a faded deer path and a few landmarks I remembered. It was quiet, out of the way, and exactly what I needed. I arrived around noon. The gravel road ended about a mile from the spot, so I parked, hoisted my backpack on, and started hiking in. The leaves had started turning orange, yellow, deep red, and the air was crisp, cool, and still. It was the kind of silence I missed. No traffic, no people talking, just the occasional rustle of leaves or a bird in the distance. When I got to the spot, it looked exactly how I remembered. A flat clearing surrounded by thick woods, a small creek running along one side, and a big flat rock that made the perfect place to sit and cook. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and built a small fire ring from rocks. I gathered firewood, set up my small stove, and got settled in. The first night was peaceful. I cooked some rice and beans, sat by the fire, and listened to the woods. I heard a few animals rustling here and there, raccoons or squirrels most likely. Around 10 p.m., I climbed into the tent and fell asleep easily. I didn't wake up once that night. The next morning, I woke up just as the sun came up. I made coffee, ate some oatmeal, and planned on doing some exploring. There was a ridge about a mile northeast that I wanted to check out. I packed a small day pack with water, snacks, a map, and a compass, and I set out. The hike up to the ridge was slow and steep. The forest felt untouched, like no one had been out there in years. It was exactly what I wanted. From the ridge, I could see for miles. Trees as far as the eye could see. No smoke from campsites, no power lines, no sounds. I sat there for almost an hour just taking it all in. Then I headed back. On the way down, I started to notice something strange. There were boot prints in the soft ground, not mine. I hadn't passed anyone, hadn't seen any sign of other people. But these were fresh. They were headed in the direction of my camp. I felt a small pit in my stomach. It wasn't fear yet, just unease. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe a hunter, maybe another hiker. The area wasn't marked on any official maps, but that didn't mean it was completely unknown. I picked up the pace a little. The closer I got to my campsite, the more I looked for signs. Broken branches, disturbed leaves. I didn't see anything else. When I got back, everything looked untouched. My tent was zipped. My gear was all there. The firewood pile I stacked was the same. I tried to let it go. I made lunch and sat by the creek for a while, but the feeling didn't really leave. I kept looking over my shoulder. Later that afternoon, I heard something, a sharp crack of a stick, not far off. I stood up, listening. Then silence again. I told myself it was a deer, but something about it didn't sit right. I went back to my tent and got my knife out of my pack. Just a small one, but it made me feel better. I didn't want to leave, but I started thinking about how fast I could break down camp if I had to. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing sounds. Not constant, but enough to keep waking me up. A shuffle here, a crack there. Could have been anything. But every time I listened closely, the sound would stop. Around 3 a.m., I heard what sounded like something brushing against the side of my tent. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I held the knife in my hand and waited. A minute passed, then 5. Nothing. I eventually drifted off again just before dawn. When I woke up, I looked around. No tracks, no sign of anything. I started to wonder if I was just spooking myself. Still, I packed my bag with more urgency than before. I was supposed to stay 2 more nights, but I decided that 1 more would be enough. I needed to shake off this feeling. I spent the day gathering more firewood and making sure everything was in order. I figured if I kept busy, I'd stop worrying. Around 5 p.m., I heard something again. This time it wasn't an animal. It was the clear, sharp sound of a metallic clang, like something hitting metal. It came from deeper in the woods, maybe 100 yards out. My stomach turned. That wasn't natural. It wasn't a falling branch or an animal moving. I stood completely still, trying to hear it again. Nothing. I put out my fire, packed some essentials into a smaller pack, and decided to do a quick check around the area. I didn't go far, just in a wide loop around the camp. I didn't find anything. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in my tent with the knife in hand, light off, listening. Just after midnight, I heard something again. A whisper of movement through leaves, then a twig snap, not 10 feet from the tent. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear. Then I saw the shadow of a shape move across the tent wall. Just a blur, like someone walking past slowly. I didn't move. Whoever it was didn't speak, didn't make another sound. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. I stayed like that until dawn. As soon as the sun rose, I broke camp. Fast. I didn't eat, didn't make coffee. I packed everything in record time and started hiking back to the car. I kept checking over my shoulder every few minutes. I didn't relax until I saw my car through the trees. When I finally got there, I threw everything in the trunk and drove. I didn't stop for hours. I didn't feel calm again until I saw highway signs and traffic. When I got home, I took a long shower and tried to forget about it. I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? I didn't know if it was a person or if I was just on edge from being alone. But something wasn't right out there. I've done a lot of camping, and I've never had that feeling before. It wasn't just fear. It was the sense that someone was out there watching me, waiting. Weeks passed, and I avoided even thinking about going back. I left my gear in the garage. Every time I walked past it, I felt that same chill. I started checking the locks on my doors more than usual. I'd wake up at night and listen for sounds in the hallway, just like I did in the woods. I knew I wasn't in danger anymore, but the feeling stuck with me. Eventually, I tried to figure it out. I looked online for stories, maps, anything. I found nothing about that area. No trails, no incidents, no missing people. But I know what I saw. I know how it felt. Someone else was out there. I wasn't alone, no matter how far off the grid I thought I was. I still haven't gone camping again. Not even close. Maybe someday I will, but not out there. Not alone. Something about that place wasn't right. It wasn't ghosts or monsters. It was something worse. It was real. I decided to go camping alone up in the snowy mountains during the shoulder season. Just before the colder months really set in, but after the crowds had thinned out. I'd been up that way a few times before, usually with mates, but this time I wanted a bit of peace. I wanted to get away from the noise, from people, from work, from everything. I didn't plan anything dramatic. Just 3 nights out with the tent, some bushwalking during the day, cooking over the fire at night, and a bit of time to sit still and think. I parked the Uda about an hour past the last small town, near an old dirt logging track that doesn't see much traffic anymore. From there, I hiked another 3 hours deeper into the bush, following a creek that cut through a steep gully. The track had long since grown over, but I had a general idea where I was headed. I'd marked a decent spot on the map weeks earlier, a flat bit of ground near the water, half-ringed by rock formations and sheltered from the wind. By the time I reached it, I was sweating through my shirt and my legs were aching from the incline, but it felt good. I set up the tent, laid out my gear, and took a few minutes to breathe in the clean air. The camp was quiet except for the creek, which bubbled gently not far from my fire pit. The canopy was thick enough to filter most of the sun, but the sky was still bright. The shadows hadn't started to stretch yet. I made a small fire before it got dark, cooked some sausages, and sat watching the flames until the coals burned low. It gets dark fast out there, especially when the trees block most of the twilight. I had my headlamp, but I didn't turn it on. I just sat there, listening to the night take over. Crickets started up, and somewhere in the distance I heard a mopoke call out, its voice echoing through the trees. I could smell the damp moss and the smoke from the fire clinging to my clothes. Eventually, I crawled into the tent, zipped up the flap, and lay down on my sleeping mat. I didn't fall asleep straight away. My mind tends to wander at night, especially when I'm alone. I listened to the creek for a while, then the wind, then what might have been a roo thumping off somewhere in the dark. The bush is always moving. I must have drifted off around 10. I woke up a few hours later. No idea what time it was, but it was still pitch black. What woke me was a sound I'd never heard before. It cut through the silence like a blade, loud and raw and awful. It sounded like something dying. A scream, almost human, but not quite. My first thought was that someone was out there, but I knew that was unlikely. No one hikes that deep in at this time of year. Then I thought maybe it was a dingo or some injured animal. But then it came again, louder this time. a drawn-out wail that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I sat bolt upright in my sleeping bag, heart hammering. I held my breath, straining to hear over the sound of blood rushing in my ears. Silence again, then another scream, closer this time. I grabbed my torch and turned it on, but I didn't leave the tent. I didn't want to go out there, not until I had a better idea of what it was. I'd heard foxes make some weird noises before, koalas too, but this was different, deeper, angrier. It sounded like something that wanted to be heard. Then, right outside the tent, I heard rustling. Not just a little shuffle, leaves crunching, movement, something big, heavier than a wallaby or an echidna. It circled the tent once, slow and steady, then went quiet. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. My torch was still on, but I turned it off and sat in the dark, listening. My breathing was shallow, and every muscle in my body was tight. I waited, counting seconds. Then that scream came again, this time so close it felt like it was inside the tent with me. I jolted back and knocked my elbow against the wall of the tent. There was more movement, then nothing. I must have sat like that for an hour, barely blinking. Eventually, the forest settled again. The crickets returned, and the night sounds slowly crept back in. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, just lay there with my knife in hand, staring at the tent ceiling, listening. When the sun finally came up, I got out of the tent and looked around. Nothing was out of place. No tracks, no signs of anything unusual. It was like the bush had just swallowed the noise. I shook it off as best I could. Maybe it was a possum. People always say they can scream like banshees. Still, it had sounded bigger, deeper, like it was angry or scared. I considered packing up and heading back, but I told myself it was just nerves. Maybe I was overthinking it. I spent the day hiking further up the ridge, trying to clear my head. The views were great. Crisp air, sun on my back. I didn't see anyone else. Didn't even see any fresh boot prints or signs of campers. Just a few root tracks and a wombat hole. That night, I made a bigger fire, sat closer to it. I cooked some steak and boiled water for tea. The fire cracked loud in the quiet, and I liked that. Made me feel less alone. I stayed up later, until the flames were just coals and the bush was completely dark. I thought maybe whatever I'd heard the night before had moved on. I got into the tent again, zipped it up tight, and left the torch within reach. I left the knife next to my sleeping bag again, just in case. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe deep and slow. I was tired, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about that scream. It happened again just after midnight. The same sound, like something being torn in half. I jumped up again, wide awake, blood thumping in my ears. Then came the rustling, fast this time. Something ran past the tent, then stopped. I could hear it breathing, heavy and raspy, paced back and forth for a few seconds, then bolted. I could hear its steps crashing through the underbrush, smashing sticks as it went. Again, I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, not even blinking. The moment the first light came through the trees, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. My fire pit was still there. My pack was untouched, but the bush was dead silent. No birds, no insects, just cold air and that feeling in my gut like I was being watched. I packed up fast. I didn't bother eating, just shoved everything into my pack, pulled the tent down, and started back the way I came. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something behind me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I made it back to the Uda by mid-afternoon, tossed my gear in the tray, climbed into the cab, and locked the doors. I just sat there for a while, engine off, staring out at the trees. Still no sounds, not even wind. I didn't talk to anyone about it when I got back. Didn't tell my mates or my family. I just said the trip was good and left it at that. I didn't want to explain it. Didn't know how to. What could I say? That I heard something scream in the middle of the night and it nearly made me piss myself? That something big circled my tent and paced outside like it was sizing me up? I looked up sounds possums make later on. And yeah, they can scream. But what I heard didn't sound like any video I found. It was lower, meaner, like it had weight behind it. Maybe it was a male possum fighting. Maybe it was something else. I haven't gone camping alone since then. I still get out, but I always bring someone with me now. And I never camp in that deep anymore. That spot, as good as it was, is off my list. There's something about the silence that doesn't feel natural. The way the bush just went dead quiet. The way whatever it was knew I was there. I don't know what it was, and I'm not sure I want to. Sometimes I still hear that scream in my head when I'm falling asleep. That raw, broken sound that didn't belong in the middle of the bush. Stuck with me, and I reckon if I ever heard it again, I'd know it straight away. It's one of those things you don't forget. Not ever. It was the summer I turned 13, one of those sticky, hot months where the sun just never seemed to go down. My parents had planned a road trip to Six Flags for us, the kind of family trip that felt big back then. Cooler packed with sodas, trunk full of tents and sleeping bags, and a printed MapQuest route tucked into the glove box. We weren't poor, but we didn't do hotels much unless it was really necessary. My mom liked to camp, and she always said you couldn't get closer to a place than sleeping right on the ground near it. We left early in the morning. My dad drove the whole way with the windows cracked and his left elbow out like always, turning red in the sun. My younger sister, Morgan, spent most of the ride buried in her DS while I stared out the window watching the trees blur by. We reached the park just before noon, but we didn't go in right away. Instead, we headed straight for the campground just outside the park boundaries. It wasn't primitive, but it wasn't much more than a glorified parking lot with some picnic tables and fire pits. We set up our big green tent under some thin trees, the ground below dry and crunchy, the air loud with cicadas. I remember sweating through my shirt while hammering the tent stakes into the hard dirt. The campground was full. Every other site was taken up by families, teenagers, a few couples, and what looked like a big group of people gathered in a corner loop. They had canopies set up, multiple tents, and some kind of equipment trailer. I figured it was a church group or something. They were loud, even in the afternoon. That night, after a long day at the park, we came back dusty and sunburnt. My legs were sore from walking and my head throbbed from too much sugar. We grilled hot dogs and sat at the picnic table in the fading light. I remember thinking how perfect it was. The park in the distance still had roller coasters lit up like Christmas trees, and the noise from that group in the corner was distant but tolerable. But then it changed. Around 9 p.m., just after we'd zipped into our tent and were trying to sleep, the noise from the corner loop grew louder. Not just music, but full-blown concert-level sound. Deep, pulsing bass and some kind of chanting. It wasn't English. I recognized it as Arabic or maybe something similar. I'd heard Arabic music before, but this wasn't the kind you'd hear in a cafe. It was fast, echoing, and intense. I didn't know what it was until much later. I would find out it was Quranic recitation blasted over loudspeakers, but at the time I couldn't make sense of it. The sound rattled in my chest like thunder. Our tent walls vibrated with each syllable. It didn't sound angry or violent, but it was so loud and relentless that it started to make me feel anxious, like I was trapped in the middle of something I didn't understand. My dad tried to ignore it, but my mom was fuming. I remember her tossing and turning, the air around her just stiff with irritation. She wasn't racist or anything. She just hated being disturbed. She had this thing about noise, especially when we were supposed to be in nature. The recitation kept going. Midnight came, then 1 a.m., and still it continued. We heard people talking and clapping. A few people even walked past our tent, flashlights bouncing, speaking in Arabic or Farsi or something close to it. The thing is, none of them seemed drunk or wild. They were just energetic in this really focused way, like they were part of something they took seriously. That almost made it more unsettling. It wasn't a party. It was something else. At some point, I gave up trying to sleep. My dad sat up for a bit, grumbling and rubbing his face. My mom, wrapped in a hoodie even though it was 80 degrees, eventually unzipped the tent and disappeared. She was gone for a while. I thought she was going to confront the group, which made me nervous. She wasn't the type to back down from a confrontation, and I didn't want her to start something. She came back maybe 20 minutes later, red in the face and breathing fast. She didn't say anything, just threw herself onto the air mattress and pulled the sleeping bag over her head. The next morning, she was still mad. Her eyes were puffy from lack of sleep, and she didn't speak much. We had planned to go to the water park section of Six Flags that day, but instead we packed up the tent, loaded the car, and drove to the front desk of a small hotel on the edge of town. Turns out she had complained, not to the group, but to the campground management. They told her the group had a reservation and permission to use a PA system until 2 a.m. for religious purposes. That made her even more livid. She told them we weren't staying another night if they couldn't ensure peace and quiet. I didn't hear her exact words, but I imagine they were sharp. Next thing I knew, we were being upgraded to a nearby chain hotel free of charge, probably just to avoid a scene. The hotel was plain and old, but it felt like heaven. Cold AC, soft mattresses, and no weird chanting. That night, I slept 10 hours straight. But that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, while walking back to the hotel from a sandwich shop, we passed a guy sitting in a minivan with the door open. He looked familiar. It was one of the men from the campground group. I recognized his deep green shirt and the narrow glasses. He wasn't doing anything strange, just watching us. He made eye contact with my mom and held it too long. She didn't say anything, but she pulled me and Morgan closer. That night, our hotel room phone rang at 1:12 a.m. My dad answered, mumbled a few things, and hung up. I asked who it was. He said the front desk, but his voice was off. A minute later, he stood, pulled the curtains tight, and slid the bolt across the door. Then he dragged the desk chair in front of it. The next morning, we left town without even going back to the park. No more rides, no more funnel cakes. My dad wouldn't say why. We just packed and drove. The car was quiet except for the hum of the tires and Morgan's soft video game sounds. When we got home, my mom told one of her friends that the trip had been ruined by some weird religious concert, and that the campground was run like a zoo. But I kept thinking about the man in the van, the phone call, and my dad locking the door like someone was going to try to come in. I think he knew something he never told us. We never camped near a theme park again. In fact, we barely camped at all after that. The gear stayed in the garage, gathering dust. The next summer, we went to the beach instead, stayed at a motel, and never brought up that trip again. But I still remember it all. The heat, the tension, the sound of those deep recitations echoing through the trees. Not scary like a horror movie, but the kind of fear that builds quietly, makes you feel watched, outnumbered, and totally out of place. A kind of fear you can't name until years later when you're older and realize something about that whole trip just wasn't right. And I think my parents knew it too. They just didn't want to say it out loud. I was probably 12 when it happened. Early 90s. Our Girl Scout troop had planned a big trip to Washington, D.C. We came from a quieter state, somewhere rural, and even though this trip was technically supposed to be educational and enriching, it was also meant to be fun. We were young, just a group of girls with backpacks, sleeping bags, and good intentions. The adults organizing the trip were just as excited as we were. We were going to see museums, monuments, and maybe even the White House if we were lucky. The troop leaders booked us at a campground just outside the city. It was more budget-friendly and gave us the kind of rustic experience scouts were supposed to have. I don't remember the name of the campground. It wasn't anything fancy. A basic place with some picnic tables, fire pits, and a central bathroom and shower facility. It felt like the perfect place to settle in for a few days. We got there in the afternoon. It was already crowded, much more than anyone had expected. Tents were popping up in every direction. Some were tidy, zipped up with proper lines and tarps. Others looked like they had been thrown together in 5 minutes. Coolers were open, folding chairs scattered around fires. The smell of burning wood mixed with something else I couldn't quite name at the time but would later recognize as marijuana. Lots of it. That first night, we were just trying to get our camp set up. The leaders looked a bit uneasy, but they tried to keep it together. We were just kids, after all. They told us to stay close to the tents, stay in groups, and use the buddy system if we needed the bathroom. But it didn't take long to realize this place wasn't going to be what we were used to. These weren't families camping with their kids. These were adults, mostly young, in groups. Some were quiet and just smiled as we passed. Others were loud, dancing, and laughing at things that didn't seem funny. People played guitars and beat drums well into the night. They didn't seem to care that other people were trying to sleep. One of the leaders found out what was going on from someone near the campground office. The Grateful Dead were in town, Landover, Maryland, probably. Their fans, called Deadheads, had flooded the area and chosen our campground as their base. None of the troop leaders had known. Nobody expected thousands of concertgoers to show up like that. But there they were, and we were now sharing space with them for the weekend. We didn't see any of the concerts. They were off at an arena somewhere else, but the fans came back afterward. They came back tired, loud, or still amped up. Some were obviously high. Some were so far gone that they were slumped against trees or lying half in, half out of tents. That first night was loud and uncomfortable, but the real horror of that trip came the next day. The bathroom was a cement block building with doors that didn't close properly and showers with barely enough water pressure to rinse off soap. There were two sections, men and women, but that weekend it didn't matter. People went into whichever one they felt like. At first, we waited in line for the women's room. Then we realized the line didn't mean anything because men were coming in and out just like everyone else. The first time I went in, I was with two other girls. We were supposed to go in, pee, and come right back out. But we couldn't even step inside without gagging. The smell hit us like a wall. Vomit, unwashed bodies, something acrid and sour that made my stomach turn. Inside, the stalls were full, but not all of them were being used the way you'd think. One had a man curled up on the floor, his head resting against the toilet. Another had a woman sitting on the floor, her head between her knees, rocking slowly. They weren't conscious in the way people normally are. They looked like they were drifting somewhere else entirely. One of the sinks had a couple brushing their teeth together, but behind them on the counter were scattered little baggies. At the time, I had no idea what I was looking at. Crumbled pieces of paper, tiny spoons, even a needle cap. I would learn years later what it all meant, but even then, something inside me knew this wasn't normal. We tried to find a cleaner stall, but most had either clogged toilets, someone inside puking or passed out, or worse. One girl slipped on something in the hallway. It was wet and slimy. She fell on her side and immediately burst into tears. When we got her up, her pants and hands were covered in someone else's mess. We didn't know if it was vomit or something else. We washed her up as best we could, but the sinks only had cold water, and the soap dispensers were empty or broken. We left the building gagging, dragging her behind us. From then on, we tried to avoid the bathroom altogether. Some of the girls held it in. Some went behind the trees when they thought nobody was looking. One girl tried to use the bathroom again the next day and came out pale as a sheet. She wouldn't say what she saw, but she kept her head down the whole walk back. Nights were worse. The music never stopped. People played drums or guitars or just howled. One man walked around in nothing but shorts, painted head to toe in bright colors. We didn't know if it was paint or chalk or something else. He kept muttering to himself and walking in circles near the tree line. Someone said he slept in a hammock between two trees, hanging low like a swing. I never saw him lie down. Another night, one of the girls in my tent started crying. She had tried to go to the bathroom and gotten cornered by a group of men and women who were passing around a bottle and something they were smoking. She said they started asking questions she didn't understand and laughing at her. She ran back before anything could happen, but she was shaken. We told the leaders, and they looked pale, like they already knew they had made a mistake by staying here. But moving a dozen girls in the middle of the night wasn't an option. Hotels were booked. The next morning, we packed up quickly. We still had a day planned for sightseeing, but nobody was in the mood. Our bags smelled like smoke and sweat. We had blisters from all the walking in DC, and now we were exhausted and gross. The troop leaders tried to cheer us up. We took group photos in front of the monuments. We smiled when we were told to, but there was a tightness in our faces that wouldn't go away. When we got back home, the trip was brought up again and again, especially when we had reunions or get-togethers. We laughed about it sometimes, but the laughter was always thin. People would say, "Remember that trip?" and shake their heads. The bathroom stories always came up. The smells, the sights, the people lying half-naked in the wrong rooms. The worst part wasn't even what happened. It was the feeling of being out of place, unsafe, and small in a world that didn't care who we were. We were kids. We shouldn't have seen what we saw, but we did. We were just trying to pee, to wash our hands, to brush our teeth. And instead, we saw what addiction and chaos looked like up close. Looking back now as an adult, I understand more than I did then. I know what those little baggies were. I know what it means when someone has a belt around their arm and a vacant stare. I know the smell of vomit mixed with drug sweat. And I understand just how lucky we were that nothing worse happened. We weren't attacked. We weren't touched. But we saw too much. More than kids should ever have to see. It changed the way I looked at camping, at adults, at the world in general. There are safe places and there are wild places. That campground was supposed to be safe. It wasn't. Even now, when I smell certain kinds of smoke, I get a flash of that weekend. That mixture of burned out firewood, pot, and human waste. And every time I hear someone talk about the Grateful Dead, I think of that campground. Not the music, not the lyrics, just the chaos they left behind. I never went camping with the Girl Scouts again after that. I was about 11 when my Girl Scout troop planned a weekend camping trip at a state park in Pennsylvania. It was the early 90s and things felt different back then. More relaxed, less connected, and definitely less protected. We had the kind of freedoms that seem insane now when I look back. I guess our leaders didn't see anything wrong with bringing a dozen young girls into the woods for a few nights without really knowing what was going on around us. We were somewhere near Hershey, but not close enough to smell the chocolate. The campground had real bathrooms and showers, not just latrines, so it felt a little more secure for us kids. There was a small store by the entrance that sold snacks, bug spray, and camping supplies. You could hear traffic from the main road if you stood still. But once you got deeper into the camp, it was mostly quiet, just woods and wind and the occasional chipmunk. We arrived on a Friday afternoon in 2 beat-up vans. I remember the heat. It wasn't unbearable, but it was humid enough that the backs of our t-shirts stuck to us. I was sweaty and uncomfortable, but excited. I'd been looking forward to this trip for weeks. I liked being outside. I liked the way the woods smelled in the summer. Pine needles, dry leaves, hot dirt. We were set to stay for 2 nights. We got to our site, which was near the middle of the campground, and started setting up tents. Most of the girls paired up with their usual friends. I shared with a girl named Amanda, who I wasn't super close with, but we got along well enough. Our troop leader, Mrs. R, made a big deal about us keeping everything clean and orderly. She showed us how to roll our sleeping bags so they wouldn't pick up too much moisture from the ground and reminded us not to leave any food in the tents, not even gum. After the tents were up and we had dinner, hot dogs on sticks and bags of chips, we all wandered around a bit before sunset. That's when we started noticing the other campers nearby. First, it was just the music. You could hear it through the trees, light, floaty, kind of lazy music with long guitar parts that seemed to go on forever. At that age, I didn't know what it was. It just sounded different from what I heard at home or on the radio. Then we saw them. They weren't like the usual campers. They had these beat-up vans and painted cars, tie-dye flags, and folding tables covered in jewelry, incense, and other stuff I didn't understand. Some of them wore bright clothes, some barely wore anything at all. A few had dreadlocks or really long beards. They moved around like they didn't care who was watching, like they were in their own world. We later learned they were deadheads, fans of the Grateful Dead, because the band was playing a show nearby that weekend. A lot of them were just camping here while following the band from place to place. I didn't think much of it at first. I was curious more than anything, but then we started sharing the same bathrooms, and it got a little strange. The bathrooms were small concrete buildings with toilets and showers. They weren't disgusting, but they weren't great either. We were told to always go in pairs and never after dark. That first night, I went in with Amanda. I remember walking past a man with no shirt on, wearing just these loose pants, standing right outside the women's door. He smiled at us. His eyes were glassy, like he wasn't really seeing us, or he was seeing something else. I didn't like it. He didn't say anything, just smiled. Inside, it smelled like smoke and soap. Some of the stalls had toilet paper, some didn't. The walls had drawings on them, swirls, peace signs, lyrics. I remember thinking it looked more like a high school bathroom than one in the woods. As we left, another man brushed past us, and he smelled like something sharp and chemical. Not alcohol, something else. I didn't know the word for it then, but I'd later figure out it was probably some kind of drug. The next day was hot. Too hot. We were supposed to go on a hike, but Mrs. R decided it wasn't worth the risk, so we stayed around camp, made crafts, and played games. The music from the Deadheads never stopped. It was like a low, constant hum in the trees. Every once in a while, we'd hear someone laugh too loud or yell something weird. At one point, two of the older girls came running back from the bathroom saying they saw a naked man dancing near the showers. Mrs. R marched over to the campground office to complain, but when she came back, she didn't look satisfied. She said the rangers were aware of the situation and told us to stay in groups, stay in the campsite, and avoid wandering. That made us feel uneasy. We weren't used to hearing our leaders sound uncertain. Later that day, I went to the bathroom with another girl named Megan. She was younger than me and kind of shy. When we got inside, we saw a woman crouched on the floor near the sink. She had short hair, a tie-dye tank top, and was rocking back and forth, mumbling. Her eyes were closed, but she kept whispering something over and over. Megan froze. I grabbed her hand, and we ran back out. We didn't tell Mrs. R right away because we didn't know how to explain it. What would we even say? That night, things felt off. Couldn't sleep. The music was louder now. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was frantic, like it was chasing its own tail. There were people laughing, yelling, arguing. At one point, a woman screamed, just once, then silence. I don't know if anyone else heard it or if I dreamed it. I laid there with my heart beating in my ears, watching the shadows on the walls of the tent shift every time someone passed by with a flashlight. At some point in the early morning, I needed to pee. I tried to hold it, but it got unbearable. I nudged Amanda, but she was dead asleep. I didn't want to wake her, so I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. I figured I'd just go behind a tree, not all the way to the bathroom. I stayed close to the tent area and squatted behind some bushes. That's when I saw him, a man, maybe 30 feet away, shirtless, barefoot, standing very still. He wasn't looking at me, not exactly, but he was facing my direction. He was thin, like really thin, ribs sticking out. His hands hung loosely by his sides. He swayed slightly, like he was listening to music I couldn't hear. I froze, heart hammering. I didn't move, didn't breathe. After a few seconds, he turned slowly and walked back into the trees. Not toward the Deadhead camp, just into the dark. I finished peeing and ran back to the tent. The next morning, I told Mrs. R. She didn't say much, but that afternoon we packed up early. She said the campground had become too active and it wasn't safe. We were supposed to stay until Sunday, but we left Saturday evening. None of us asked questions. I think we were all relieved. On the drive back, we passed by the concert venue. People were everywhere, dancing, shouting, spinning in circles. It didn't look like music to me. It looked like chaos. Later, I found out that during that same weekend, a girl around our age had gotten lost in the woods just a few miles from our campground. They found her the next day, shaken up and dehydrated but alive. She didn't say much, just that she'd gotten separated from her family and wandered off. But I couldn't stop thinking about that man in the woods, the one who didn't say a word, the one who didn't seem quite right. I thought about what might have happened if I had gone further from the tent, if I had walked toward the bathrooms instead of staying close, if I had looked away, or spoken, or followed a sound. I never went camping again after that. I didn't tell my parents the full story, only parts. As an adult, I realize now how careless it was to have us there. No one screened the other campers. No one made sure the bathrooms were safe. It was just a state park with open access and a huge concert going on down the road. I think about those people sometimes, the ones with the painted vans and glassy eyes. I know now that most deadheads were probably harmless, just chasing music and good times. But not all of them. Not the man who stood and stared. Not the woman mumbling on the floor. Not whoever screamed in the middle of the night. It wasn't just a camping trip. It was something else. Something we were too young to understand. And I'm grateful we all made it out of there. Because I think about how easily it could have gone differently. How one wrong step could have ended in a story no one would believe. And that's what scares me the most. Not what happened, but how close we got to something worse. Something that would have never made the news. Just another lost girl. Another scared child. Another mistake someone was too late to fix.